There we go. There we go. Hey Ben, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. It's Friday. Had a busy morning doing some chaplaincy
Yeah,
stuff. Good
that's good.
conversations.
That's good. That's good. Well, it's wild to me that we're already in December, and
Right.
and lots of fun stuff happening right now. Lots of good conversations with leaders, and so let's jump in right away here for the next few minutes. So what I want to do today, and this is based off of some of the conversations that we've been having over the last few weeks as people are winding down with ministry, right? Gotten text messages over the last couple of days. Hey, pray for us. It's our last midweek. We got our last Christmas party coming up here in the next couple of weeks, finals next week for some schools. And so there's kind of this moment of evaluation, right?
Hmm.
And I think that it's a good opportunity, even for leaders, for us to evaluate our semester. And so, what we want to do today is spend a little bit of time just talking through some frameworks, some things that will help you do. So, any thoughts in terms of evaluation, Ben, before we jump in here?
Yeah, I mean, one general comment, right? You're gonna, as you lead, you're gonna experience things. You're gonna learn from that. But I was trying to remember who this quote was from. My rough summary of it is basically like, experience is not the teacher. Evaluated experience
Yeah,
is what is going to cause you to learn and grow. So I think we the tendency is depending on your wiring. Some people are wired differently. Um, but I know for me, it's easy to just say, I'm going to keep pressing forward. There's what's the next thing we got to do? What's the next thing we got to do? Or to shift from kind of going 100 miles an hour ministry wise. Okay, we hit the end of the semester. All right, now it's time to rest. I think helpful transition is going to be taking that time before you, if maybe you have a schedule. If you're campus ministry, maybe you get to have a chunk of time fully off at the end of the semester or over the holiday. Maybe you have stuff you got to do. If you're church based, you got big, sometimes the week of Christmas, week leading up to Christmas is a lot of work. Either way, I think it is important to help yourself mentally and emotionally transition, and to take the time to set yourself up to learn well from the semester by taking time to reflect, review,
for
and
sure.
say what worked, what didn't work, and we'll talk a little bit about some
Yeah,
tools for that.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and we'll talk about what we're going to do over the next few weeks, just to kind of give you guys a heads up. Is we're going to talk about evaluation today. We'll talk next
Yep.
week on Friday about how to leverage and the break time, right? So as you think about the next several weeks, how do we best utilize that time? And then what we're going to do is we've done this, I think, over the last 4 or 5 years, is we've done a training that we've opened up to anybody about kind of
Hmm.
reflecting and planning on the next year. And so it's a great opportunity just to stop, to pause, to say, okay, let's reflect on kind of a broader, not just a ministry context, maybe even a more personal context, but then let's think about what are some of the next steps forward that we need to jump in together. So let's do this. I want to walk through four different questions or kind of sections. This is a framework. Even Ben and I were on a call yesterday, kind of talking about some evaluation that we're going to be doing here in a couple of weeks in Austin as our team is together. And these are some of the similar questions that we're going to use for evaluation as well. So the first one is this question of celebration. We're going to talk about 4 C's. So the first C is going to be celebration. And celebration is really around this question of like, what are we celebrating that we saw God do this last semester? What worked? Was it our midweek? Was it our leadership was actively discipling? We need, I think, before we get into like evaluation in kind of some negative sense, I think that we need to reflect and say, okay, God, what did you do this last semester, and remind ourselves of that.
Yeah, well worth. I mean, we've done webinars and stuff along these lines in the past, but a recurring theme in the Old Testament is the idea of taking time to recall and remember. Multiple times, God tells the Israelites to build an altar or set up a pile of stones or whatever that's going to help them remember the stuff that's happened
Yep.
and acknowledge that. I think on a much smaller scale than, say, crossing the Jordan River or whatever, I think we're taking time to look and say, okay, what do we need to celebrate? And it's one thing, we're talking here about like having a meeting or doing some personal reflection and listing some of those things. Probably worth also thinking about is if there's particular things that are really worth celebrating, how are we going to actually celebrate those things? How are we going to acknowledge some real great work that someone did on the team, or how are we going to celebrate the baptisms that the people who came to faith this semester, and actually put something tangible on the calendar in place that is going to acknowledge that and celebrate in an intangible way.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So that's the first C. The first C is celebration. Here's the second C is what challenges, right? And this is this question of like, okay, we had some assumptions or some ways in which we thought the semester was going to go, or some things that we thought were going to happen, and some things that we dreamed about, planned about. That's a part of ministry, right? But then there's the recognition that there's going to be challenges that we face. There's going to be moments of saying, okay, that didn't work exactly the way that we thought it was. And so we need to assess what were some of those challenges. What were some of the things that we thought were going to be true, that we thought we were going to accomplish, that we thought were going to be a part of our ministry, and it didn't. And it's really this question of like, we'll use this question of kind of what's broken, what didn't work the way that we want to. And it's really around this idea of reflecting on the challenges that we faced over the last semester. They can be obstacles, they can be tough moments, right? So I was just messaging a guy here that Ben and I are connected to, and he was talking about some challenging moments that he had. And I think that we need to recognize what some of those challenges are. A couple thoughts on that, Ben, that you have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can think there's a couple different, might be helpful on that one to think categories. The default, at least the way I tend to go when I'm thinking about challenges, you kind of look externally, like, okay, it was challenging that, our budget was lower than what we had previous year or whatever. Those are kind of some external things. But probably worth also saying, let's evaluate what were maybe some personal, mental, emotional, relational challenges. What were some, if you're talking about this with your team, what were some relational dynamics within the team kind of challenges that we focused, and particularly if you're doing this with a group of people, giving them some categories to think in when it comes to identifying those challenges, or the things that are broken, is going to help you analyze. And I think this is an area where it's really important to practice the idea of like brutal honesty, not in a like mean or rude kind of way, but say, hey, let's be really honest about what were the actual challenges. Is it like, man, team dynamics often can be a challenge that is like, we're just going to not talk about that one because then it's going to bring up the issue. But it's in the clearer you are, the more honest and direct you are about the challenges that you face, the more prepared you're going to be able to be to solve those in the future.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. And I think we need just to be reminded that ministry is challenging, right? I was on a call yesterday with one of the guys that Ben and I know, and he was just sharing some of the frustrations, and that we need to be honest with those moments and just say, you know what, there has been some challenges, and there's some things that I was hoping that were going to happen, and students were going to respond a certain way, or young adults were going to do that didn't happen. And that we need to be willing to do those things and recognize those things. So first C, celebration. Second C, challenge. Here's the third C is going to be, what are the chasms? And what I mean by that is, what are the things that are missing in the last semester, right? So what are there things that are there gaps in which you missed or need to focus on, or that didn't happen? Talking with another leader a couple weeks ago, of just saying, hey, this didn't happen this last semester, and it needs to happen. I think we need to be honest and recognize where those chasms, where those gaps, what's missing in our ministry.
Maybe what are some examples of things that would fall in that category, Andy?
Well, one of them that we talked through specifically with this leader is the recognition that there was some missing expectations of leadership. Like they didn't clearly define. So they had they invited some leaders onto the team to do certain things. But then what they recognized is there was a level missing of like, hey, I didn't give you specific what I mean by that role, things to do in that. And so that would be one example of something that was missing, that was just from a conversation that I had. Any thought? What are a couple of thoughts?
You can think about too, like programmatic things that were missing, like, oh man, we totally missed out on, like,
Yep.
maybe previous semesters we did a great job of scheduling on campus evangelism. This semester,
Yep.
because of other things, we lost track of that and didn't do that. Communication would be another category. I think you could say that, which is kind of along the lines of what you're talking about, but I meant that more in the sense of like to the larger ministry versus just the leader team. Communication is probably, that as a general category, is probably one of the biggest ones where you're going to see like, oh man, we missed out on opportunities to communicate vision, to be clear with our team, to whatever.
Yep. So first C, celebration. Second C, challenge. Third C, chasm. Here's the fourth C, clarity. And clarity is around this idea of what is maybe more confusing. I'll give an example of this is one of the conversations I was in a few weeks ago was around the intent of what they wanted a program to do, that students weren't clear with who to invite. And so there was a bunch of confusion in terms of just like, okay, who's this for? What is it supposed to accomplish? Kind of some of those pieces where there was really kind of this idea of confusion and needed some clarity. And so addressing some of those areas of confusion where we need more clarity. And that can, like even you said, Ben, that can be in terms of communication or direction or vision, team expectations, team dynamics, all of those things can be a part of clarity.
Yeah, and there's probably some overlap or intermixing between the chasms and the clarity, right? Sometimes some of the stuff that is missing is going to be confused. Oh, lost your video, Andy. Oh, there you go. I didn't want you to just disappear.
No, I hit a button that I shouldn't have.
So let's talk a little bit about how do you okay, those are the four categories. Practically, how do you go about like using those questions in evaluation?
Yeah. Well, I think that I want to break it into a couple different categories, and I'll let you kind of kick off on this one because I think that there's some like individual assessment that we need to do, right? And we'll talk about that even more in a few weeks of even some personal leadership, but even in our personal ministry. But then I think there's some team specific opportunities. And I think that we need to be very intentional with both of those. They're not going to we don't just stumble into this, but we need to be very proactive and intentional about creating those spaces.
Yeah. If you're not taking time on both those levels, an individual personal level. So when I say personal, I mean both personal in the sense of ministry, what's my personal role within ministry, and personal in the sense of my life as a person outside of the context of ministry. You need to take time for that kind of reflection, evaluation. And also doing that if you have a team, whether that's a team of staff or a team of volunteer leaders, I think you're missing out big time if you're not doing that evaluation stuff. Now, if it's December 5th, if you're watching this, listening to this, and be like, oh shoot, I would love to do that with my team of leaders, but we're wrapping up, or we've already wrapped up for the semester, and they're students and they're headed back home. We're not going to have that. That's not a huge deal. Like you can do this in January after people come back.
Yep.
In some ways, there may be benefit to having a little bit of space for people to reflect and come back. Either way, like put a block of time on the calendar. And I think let's start on the individual level.
Yep.
I think a couple of things that are going to be really helpful to you to do this evaluation well on a personal level, both ministry and your personal life, is one, block out a solid chunk of time. I'd say hour plus at minimum, 2 hours, and get in a different location than usual. Like if you typically are working out of an office at the church, don't do this evaluation in the office at the church. Go to a coffee shop. If you typically are working at a coffee shop, go to a different coffee shop or go on campus or whatever, just because being in a different environment is going to trigger your brain to think in a slightly different way. Having that extended time, having a larger, like different than normal context, and then come prepared to actually write stuff out. Like don't just try to do this in your brain, whether that's typing or physically writing. And then the last thing I would say on that is, I think prior to going through and making these lists, it's going to be worthwhile to go kind of like flip back through, whether it's your calendar or your photo reel on your phone or Photos taken at ministry events. If you have like someone who shoots photos for your ministry, look back through that stuff, or notes from meetings stuff. Take 20 to 30 minutes and flip back through that, because there's probably a lot of stuff that God did, the stuff that happened, events that went well, things that didn't go well, that you aren't going to come to top of mind. But taking that time to kind of reflect back and skim through some of those things to jog your memory is going to give you a lot more food for filling those lists.
For sure. And I want to reiterate something that you said is like, I think in the midst of being intentional, it requires us to block out time. And what I would say is like, don't just like, you said block out an hour or two. I would say put it on your calendar a week from now or 2 weeks from now, get it on a day and saying, I'm not going to let other meetings jump, like intrude on this. I'm not going to think about I'm actually going to create this space and be intentional, and even pick the location ahead of time if you can. Just say, here's where I'm going to go. So let's talk about team a little bit, Ben, because I think that's important too. Is like evaluation isn't just a personal thing, but it's a team dynamic as well. And so I'm curious for you, as you've worked with leaders in evaluation, what are some kind of helpful things in terms of maybe that they can do and to prepare their teams or prepare themselves to work with their team in an evaluation space?
Yeah, if you're going to do an evaluation like this, again, you're going to want to block out a longer chunk of time. And you're going to want to think about what group size you're going to have here. Probably, I would not go larger than 10 people in an evaluation conversation like this. Now, you might have like a lot, maybe if you're a large ministry, maybe you have 4 staff and like 15 to 20 leaders in varying capacities. If you want to do that evaluation, I would think about, and like have everyone in there, I would think about doing multiple groups, and that, which is going to be helpful for you as a leader. You're going to get different perspectives, but I would not go beyond 10 people in a room for that, just for the sake of not bogging stuff down. You're going to want to be in a space where you can have, I would say probably an hour and a half to 2.5 hours with a group of up to 10 people, in a space where you can actually write stuff down, put it up on the wall, and have it visible in front of people, so that you can have some helpful conversations about it. Because having conversations, listening stuff, and trying to have people hold everything in their mind is not going to be as effective as writing on a whiteboard or a tear sheet or on the TV, typing stuff up there. So those are 2 like practical things. A couple other things I would think about if I'm doing this with a team would be communicating ahead of time. Here's what we're going to do, and then giving them the sort of like, here's some pre-work to do. One, maybe say, hey, look back, do what we were just talking about on a personal level, look back through photos, or go back over the calendar, or go back through meeting notes and answer, like pre-populate your lists. That's going to be helpful, particularly for people who are more internal processors. If you got people who are external processors and you just show up, and when they get to the meeting, it's the first time they're hearing about what you're going to do. Those people who are internal processors, probably after the meeting's done, are going to start populating their lists and be like, oh, that's right, but I didn't get to share that. So by giving that pre-work, you're going to set people up to come prepared to the meeting and for you to have a more productive conversation.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. And I would encourage you just and I think about even things that we've done where, evaluations where we didn't keep record of it long-term, where you could actually reflect and look back on that a year from now or 2 years from now. I think those are important things to capture as well, of an evaluation of a semester, evaluation of an event, evaluation of a team, whatever, of just like, and this is kind of goes back into the personal one too. There's something that happens in our brain when we're like writing things down, right? That's actually imprinting things differently than just listening auditorially through through a conversation. I think that there's things that happen specifically in our brain when we write things down. And so, I would encourage you, take some time, block it out. Any last comments on that, Ben, at all?
Yeah, 1 or 2 other thoughts. One specifically for the team thing. What I think a great way to do a team evaluation like this is, like we said, have people do some pre-work, maybe even have people email or share their responses somehow ahead of time, so everyone else has had time to read other people's lists. Then when you come together as a team, make a long list
Yeah.
of each thing. So have everyone read through their list of things, write it up on the whiteboard or a tear sheet. Maybe you do a single tear sheet page for each of those questions, or each of the C's, and then make a long list of those. And as people, probably some of the stuff, there's going to be some overlap, right? You might have 3 people who say essentially the same thing. As you write those up there, kind of maybe put a check mark or whatever by, or underline a thing that shows up every time. So what that's going to tell you is, oh, here's some things that jump out as like everyone said this is a missing thing. Very clearly, that's a issue that you want to address. Whereas if only one person said it, that doesn't mean it's not true, but it's probably less of an urgent issue. The other thing, and this I think applies both on a personal level and on a team level, is push yourself further than you go by default on making those lists. If it's probably pretty easy to sit down and write 5 things, maybe 10 things in answer to each of those questions. If you get to 10 and you're like, I'm tapped out, push yourself to do 5 more, because usually it's that kind of like scraping the bottom of the mental barrel to answer those questions where you're going to discover some interesting things, particularly in the team context. Then last thing, I think I just want to talk real briefly before we wrap up about so you've made those lists. What do you do next after that?
Yeah.
What do you think, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we need to do is this goes into a little bit of the kind of evaluating what are immediate changes that we can make and what are more kind of long-term changes that we need to make, right? And I think that this will go more into the planning of the next semester. There's things you can change immediately and saying, okay, we're going to send out a weekly text message to our students, right, or young adults. That's an instantaneous. But then there are other things that, in terms of maybe the chasm question, things that are missing that may not happen next semester. They may happen the semester after that. And so even beginning to kind of create a plan around some of the things that you've come up with. And then what I would also figure out a way too of like, how do you keep those things in front of you and review those things over the next semester? So, let's say you long list all of those 4 C's and you come up with your top 3 or your top 4. Right. I think that those should be conversation points for before each meeting that you have over the next semester of like, okay, how are we doing on these? Like have we made progress on some of these things? Because I think you can do the work, right? But if we don't do anything with that work and keep it in front of us, then a lot of ways we're not kind of like squeezing out everything that we could from the hard work that we've done with the team.
Yeah, and you're probably going to ultimately build more frustration if people are like, oh, we know we have this problem and now we're just ignoring it, pretending we don't know about it anymore. I think move into some sort of, okay, what do we do next? Wrap up the conversation, that evaluation phase with, okay, let's draw out 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4 things from these lists that we want to take action on, and plan out how we're going to take action on that. That may be, all right, 6 months from now, we're going to come back. It may be, let's keep this in front of us in meetings, or maybe it's, all right, you and I or these people on the team, we're all going to start working on this stuff so that by X date we're going to have that.
Love it. Awesome. Well, hey, let's wrap it up there. Been about 23 minutes or so. So like I said at the beginning of the call, next week we'll talk about how to best structure the next few weeks, right? So we have this kind of opportunity with family and friends, and weekly programming is winding down, and so there's some opportunities of how do we want to leverage these next few weeks. And then also Ben and I will be jumping on a call here towards the end of maybe mid to end of December, talking about like how do you plan for the next year. It's a great opportunity. So I think that's it for today. Ben, thanks for your time. Thanks for jumping on this call. Have a great weekend and look forward to chatting with you at some point down the road.
Yep. Talk soon.
Okay. See you, everybody.